Coming up on this week's show, LimeWire is back.
Play your original Xbox Online again.
And we chat to Core Design's Peter Connelly about composing Tomb Raider.
And the Retro Hour podcast is brought to you every Friday with our amazing friends at Bitmap Books. Now, one of their books you should so check out, I'm Too Young to Die, the ultimate guide to first-person shooters, covering that incredible genre from 1992 to 2002. That's coming out a bit later on this year. You can check out all about that and the rest of their retro gaming books at bitmapbooks.com. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 336. Your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And great to have you joining us for another hour-ish of retro gaming goodness, where we get to completely nerd out about our favourite topic in the world, classic video games, bringing you up to speed on all the big goings-on in the world of retro from over the last 7 days. Some big stories to get into this week. And, of course, a very special guest in the second half of the show as well. Now, actually, if you enjoyed last week's episode, we had a really good reaction to that when we're talking about Rare's Road to the Game Boy with Paul Makachek. And I think, we do get interviews occasionally on this show where we could probably do at least double or triple the length that we recorded. Yeah, that was definitely totally one of those. And it's so many great stories.
We didn't even cover Donkey Kong Land, which is just fantastic. Yeah. So many titles in that.
We started in the 80s and we got to the early 90s. And we were like, yeah, we're over an hour now. And as Dan says, the retro hour-ish, with the news and everything.
No more than 90 minutes.
Yeah, more like 90 minutes. So a follow-up to that is definitely on the cards, isn't it, Ravi?
Yeah, totally. And we're going to actually follow up with that in Norway, which is going to be really awesome because we are going to Retro Messe, which is happening on the 20th to the 21st of August. And they have got some wicked guests. We went there before and it was an amazing time because they had this fantastic Rare panel, didn't they?
Yeah, we went, 2019? I know since the pandemic, time's just kind of messed up in my mind. So the fact that, the last couple of years just kind of feel like they've all merged into one. But yeah, we went out there and it's a great little event. If you're anywhere near Sandefjord in Norway, or even, if you live nearby, it's an hour and 15 minutes flight from here in the UK?
Yeah. And
and if you haven't been to Norway before, it's a beautiful place just for a weekend visit.
And it's amazing, the companies behind this event, there's Nintendo, Bandai Namco, it's Lego, some really big names. And it's a really nice event, actually, because we get to meet everyone from those Scandinavian countries. And, there's even people that come from the Arctic Circle. And it's just wow, amazing talking to them. But this year, they have got an amazing lineup. Yeah, so they're going to be having John St. John from Duke Nukem, of course, the voice of Duke Nukem, but also the voice of Big the Cat. They're going to have Chris Marlowe as well, who was from Conker's Bad Fur Day and Sea of Thieves. Of course, Paul Makachek as well, because he also worked on Banjo-Kazooie, which we didn't even cover as well. And David Doak, the legendary guy from the Silicon Graphics units, and Rare, who did GoldenEye 007, and of course Kevin Bayliss, who did Battletoads, and there might be a few more guests announced as well. So this is going to be a mental event. I think I'm going to get Joe and lock him in a sauna and see how he reacts.
You were saying that to me earlier today. I am so happy that I can make it. I've run out of annual leave at work, and I had to get the planets to align and people to cover my shifts, and I had to literally bend over backwards to get the time off work for my rota to come out for August, and it turned out it was my weekend off anyway, which was really funny. But I am so happy that I can make it this year, and I'm really, really, really looking forward to it. But I don't know about you, Dan, but my missus turned around today and said, I'd love to go to Norway, and it just gave me that dead-eyed look.
Yeah, unlucky.
Yeah.
You know what, though? Now that everyone knows that Handsome Joe is coming to Norway, I've got to fit in the demographic of this event. It might be suddenly 90% female. Anyway,
Oh, yeah, brilliant.
Yeah. So, it is going to be amazing. The first panels that we've done, we're going to be on stage doing a live podcast pretty much. We'll be recording some of the panels to play out on the show as well. So, I know we do have, quite a big listener base in the Norway area. So, if you've never made it along to a Retro Hour live event, you want to come and see us, or, want to fly out for the weekend, like we said, Retro Messe coming up on the 20th to the 21st of August in Sandefjord, and I'll put a link to that in our show notes at theretrohour.com. Now, before that, that, we have got, of course, an amazing guest this week on the show. We're going to be talking about core designs and Tomb Raider, which I know we've done previous episodes about core designs and Tomb Raider, but it's been quite a while since we visited it. And actually, our guest today, he was integral to some of those later Tomb Raider games that we haven't really spoke all that much about.
Yeah, we've kind of stopped at Tomb Raider 2, and we had Nathan McCree on from Core Designs previously, and Nathan kind of did the soundtrack and like laid the foundations for the Tomb Raider games. And Peter Connelly, who we had today, he's kind of continued that, taking a lot of influence and ended up composing the Tomb Raider games and the later ones. But, you know, they're really interesting because I don't know about you. Did you guys kind of get later into the Tomb Raider titles like Tomb Raider 3,
Tomb Raider,
The Last Revelation? And
Tomb Raider
Chronicles?
3 is actually my most played Tomb Raider.
Okay.
I played that more. I didn't even have Tomb Raider 1. I played that much later on, but Tomb Raider 2 and 3 were like my key Tomb Raiders. I actually think 3 was the best, probably because it had like the quad bike and the dinosaur and all, you know, the T-Rex boss and stuff like that in it. But yeah, no, amazing games, amazing soundtracks. So it's really cool that you guys kind of, like you say, you always stop at number 2. So it's really cool, you know, to hear and talk about, you know, after that.
Yeah, and it's a real progression of like technology and music as well, because there's a whole orchestral thing that kind of happened with Tomb Raider where it got more into a grand orchestra style. And eventually on the Angel of Darkness, they actually recorded with the London Symphony Orchestra in Abbey Road Studios, you know, the legendary studios in London where the Beatles were walking across that zebra crossing, you know. Absolutely amazing. So it's a really interesting interview. And, you know, Peter's the audio designer for Watch Dogs. He's also done Driver San Francisco. He's done so many things. So it's just fantastic to have him on and have a audio episode. We've not done one for a while, have we?
They're always your favourite, aren't they, Ravi?
Oh, yeah. I love to nerd out about audio.
So yeah, it's going to be a really interesting chat. I mean, we kind of go from like the Commodore 64 era right up to like, you know, the modern day pretty much. So really good chat with our special guest, Peter Connelly. He's coming up on the show in around 30 minutes from now. Now, of course, before we get into our guest, we like to update you on what's been happening in the world of retro gaming over the last week. And this is really cool. Now, Xbox Live, I mean, that was such a revolution when I first played an Xbox Online. But obviously, there were some dedicated fans that were devastated when the original Xbox Live from the OG Xbox was shut down back. I think it was like 2009, wasn't it? I remember
2010. If they shut it down,
2010.
Yeah,
I remember that story about, you know, those kind of last Halo 2 players.
Yeah,
who just did everything to keep their consoles online and connected. You know, I think some of them managed to do like a couple of months until they had a power cut or something like that. And it went off. But now it turns out there is going to be a very simple way for you to play your original Xbox, the 2001 model, online and actually bring those classic online games back to life.
Yeah, it's really interesting. This is. I don't know about you, but I used to love the original Xbox. And those were the days when people would do voice chat, and it would be like crazy voice chat. You know, it was like you play a lot of games now, and there is that voice chat option, but people don't actually use that. It was great because it had that whole kind of adding friends as well, and then
and the voice changer.
I think they also had messages, right? So you could leave messages for people, like little voicemails and stuff, and that was always a good source of entertainment. I do remember though playing Xbox Live, and of course Halo was like one of the absolutely huge titles, and it was great to play online.
Yeah, because there has been a way to play original Xbox games online, kind of, because there were some games that allowed you to do local multiplayer with a LAN connection, and there's been a service called Xlink Kai that I remember trying probably about 10 years ago, and you'd have to have a PC that you plugged your Xbox into via an Ethernet cable, and then it would kind of act as like another machine, and it would allow you to
kind
do
of bridging it onto.
Yeah, so but it would only work on games that had like a LAN option. But now, I mean, this looks like it's pretty much going to restore all the functionality of the original Xbox Live. This is a service that's coming out soon called Insignia. Now, at the moment, to use this, you do actually need a modded original Xbox because you need to get like the hard disk number and the Ethernet, all the stuff. That
there's like a few credentials, isn't there, that you kind of
MAC address and that kind of thing.
Kind of attached to it, yeah.
Yeah, but they're saying that what they're going to do is when this comes out properly, there's going to be kind of a save game injection mod that you can run on any Xbox, retail Xbox, and it will then enable it to play online. So you don't need to do any soft mods or anything like that. And so far, there's going to be 13 games that are going to be available when this launches, including, and we've got some classics in here, Counter-Strike, Crimson Skies, Madness 3, Phantasy Star Online, Episode 1 and 2, Star Wars, Jedi Academy, Street Fighter Anniversary Collection. Unfortunately, they're saying that Xbox original Halo 2 is not going to be on that list to start with, which I imagine that was probably the most popular online game, wasn't it? But they're saying they are working on that, but apparently it needs a little bit more work to implement it.
I was going to say that surely they're missing a trick by not putting Halo 2 on there, but it's good to hear that they're working on it. But it just works on original Xbox. It doesn't work with the backwards compatibility, so you can't
I think
boot
some
these
of
games
them,
up on a 360 or anything like that.
I think some of them are like backwards compatible, but not with the service. It's like a separate thing.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Like a lot of these games can be played on 360 and Xbox Series X and stuff like that, but it will only work with the original Xbox, which, as Dan said, the retail Xbox, which I think is really cool.
I think it's really awesome, and it's got a lot of nostalgia for me, like adding your gamer tag and stuff. But you know what I'd love to see? I'd love to see them actually release like the scratch cards that you used to get. So you used to get for your like Xbox Live membership and Gold Pass and stuff. You'd have a scratch card where you'd scratch it out and you get like a subscription code and put it in. Maybe even just a virtual one of them would be really good fun.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether they're going to be charging for this. At the moment, I mean, it's in beta at the moment. So the best video, obviously MVG. We always recommend his videos if you want to check out kind of where it is so far. I imagine, because Microsoft would probably kick up a bit of a stink if they were charging for something like this, I imagine. So I've got a feeling it's probably going to be free. But there is a Twitter account if you want to kind of keep an eye on where the beta is right now. And obviously I'll link up MGV's video in the show notes as well. But I think it's awesome because it always kind of made me sad. I remember reading in the news that day, that kind of countdown to the original Xbox Live going offline. And I've kind of been waiting for like the PS3 and the 360 to go offline, which I've got a feeling can't be too far away now. But, the fact that the fan community can do something like this and bring them back online kind of makes it feel like, all's not lost. Yeah. And there is going to be a way to kind of play those classic games online, in the future.
And I think there's a benefit to having it kind of like on a Twitter account or online where you can notify everyone, because you can say, hey, we're all going to play at this time, because let's get real, there's not going to be that many matches as there was like back in the days. When you were doing matchmaking, you were just instantly chucked into one.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've tried it with, the X-Link and stuff, which, as I mentioned before, that kind of needs a bit more work, which I imagine, the fact you've got to kind of run it on a PC and connect it, it's a bit more effort, so that probably puts a lot of people off doing it. But yeah, I mean, you're kind of limited to how many people are actually still playing original Xbox games and stuff. But I mean, they often do that. They do it on Twitter or Discord, say everyone's going to be on Saturday night, 8 p.m., that kind of thing. So you can actually schedule a match in advance, which I've seen people do that with, Quake Arena and stuff on the Dreamcast if you're playing that on third-party servers now. But it is really cool that just like these services can be brought back to life and, you can enjoy these experiences in the future as well. So very cool. No release date as yet, but we'll keep an eye on that. Apparently not too far away now. And we'll put everything we know in the show notes at theretrohour.com. I know you lads are massive Pokemon fans. This is an interesting headline on Game Rant. Pokemon fan builds a cartridge that makes Game Boy function as a Pokedex. Now, I've got to say, not being a Pokemon fan, what is a Pokedex? I was going to say, Dan, tell us what a Pokedex is. Let me just Google.
I guess the best way I can describe it is a digital encyclopedia for the Pokemon, and essentially a smartphone before smartphones were a thing. When the cartoon came out in the 90s, the main character, Ash Ketchum, has like a red smartphone. The only way I can kind of, describe it.
They probably could have done it in book form, but it looks quite modern, but that's...
yeah, sort of. So he gets out the little Pokedex, the little red device, and he will hold it to a Pokemon, and then it will talk to him and tell him what the Pokemon is and stats about it. So it'll say this is a grass type Pokemon that likes to live in the forest and it's weak against fire. So that's my simplistic description of a Pokédex.
A Pokemon encyclopedia, pretty much.
Pretty much. Does that make sense, Ravi? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it is. And like a user on Reddit called Queen Leafer has created, shown a video of a custom Game Boy cartridge that actually functions as a Pokédex. Now, it's quite interesting because there's a lot of information in there. And interestingly, this isn't one of those things where it's been put out there and it's like, you guys can download this now, or this is a project I'm doing. The user's been very quiet about this and, not really put much information about it out other than a video of it and showing a Wi-Fi enabled Game Boy cart playing it.
Well, it doesn't surprise me because of Pokemon's Nintendo, isn't it?
Yes.
We all know what Nintendo are like. But yeah, no, essentially it's... I wasn't sure what to expect, whether like it was a case of you hold the Game Boy up to like something and it tells you
with
what
the
it
Game
is.
Boy
But
camera.
obviously, it's not quite that advanced. But essentially, it's a Wi-Fi cartridge that you plug into your Game Boy. It's an original Game Boy, which is really cool. And essentially, you type in a Pokemon, and it will come up and give you the Pokédex information about that Pokemon.
So this is connecting to the internet to download this information?
I believe so, yeah. So, you connect it and it connects to the Wi-Fi. You type it in, and it does actually say on the screen, Wikipedia. So I'm assuming it gives you the Wikipedia description of the Pokemon, which I guess is a really good database because of, Pokemon's so famous. I imagine there's probably a Wikipedia page about every single Pokemon on there.
I was going to say, how many Pokemons are there?
There's 151 in the original series, in the original run. I want to say there's like 800 now, 750 of them or something like that. I could be completely wrong.
If the person that made this was actually writing them all up, 800 of them themselves, that would be pretty hardcore for something that you're not even going to release to everyone just for your own personal use.
But yeah, no, it looks like it uses Wikipedia. But as Ravi says, quite a few Redditors have been saying, "Can I buy this? Can I get one?" And Queen Leafer is pretty much saying, "No, it's a one-off," and people are really disappointed. But I can see why, because of I can't remember if Nintendo outright own Pokemon, but they have a big link to Pokemon. They only tend to come out on Nintendo consoles and everything. So I imagine there's the fear of God there,
or that the user might just be mean.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, I also think there's that whole thing of like, you make a project for yourself, you do something for yourself, and then everyone goes, "Why isn't this a product that I can buy instantly?" And it's like, maybe I just want to make a Pokédex for myself, like, everything doesn't have to kind of become a project or be shared with everyone. I think it's quite interesting. I've always wondered, like, has there ever been a copy of the Bible or something that's ever come out on the Game Boy? Or
I feel like that is a thing. That's
actually LGL's probably covered it.
Probably, or AVGN's probably played it or something. But I had a little Google. There's 905 Pokemon now, so I was close. I can tell you what, I could probably name the first 150, but that's it.
Yeah, that's an after hours episode.
Yeah, that's an after hours episode. Or if I can get my hands on this Game Boy Pokédex,
or do an impression of every Pokemon.
Yeah, but I mean, these little Wi-Fi cartridges, I mean, I guess it uses those, the ESP8266 little Wi-Fi modules, which you can put into anything these days, and you can get them off Amazon for like £3 or £4. So in terms of technologically, I mean, it's not that advanced, I guess. I mean, you can kind of put those in anything, but it is very cool seeing an original Game Boy online. I mean, the interface kind of reminds me a bit of when you used to get WAP on your mobile phone, that kind of text-based internet service that was around in the early 2000s.
Maybe we'll get like a Game Boy browser that's kind of like everything cut out of it and all the stuff reduced to just text. But you could kind of...
There's got to be a link support or something, the text-based browser. There's got to be one for the Game Boy.
Yeah, it's coming eventually, I think, with stuff like this coming out, And I guess the reason that is Wi-Fi and it's receiving that information is it probably won't be able to store everything on there, but I don't know, it's just text, so maybe.
Yeah, so if you want to check out the video of something you can't have, I'll put that in our show notes at theretrohour.com as well. Now, were you a fan of Quake on the Sega Saturn, Joe?
I have it, and I've played it, but yeah, it's a very cool port, the Quake Sega Saturn version, because of it's quite different to all the other ports because of it uses the Power Slave engine, which we've actually covered on the show.
Which
before.
was called exhumed in a few other countries, wasn't it?
It was called Power Slave in America and then exhumed in European territories. I believe it could be the other way around. You could be right, but yeah, the Quake version of the Sega Saturn version of Quake, it was kind of similar to the original Doom because of the engine wasn't as powerful as the actual Quake engine, so they had to take a lot of liberties with it. So the weapons are sprite based rather than 3D models. So it kind of reminds me of that original Doom with the sprites, but it was also unique because it actually had quite a few unique levels in it. So there's a lot of Quake fans. The Quake population a lot of them see the Quake the Sega Saturn version of Quake as very unique. So interestingly, it's being ported to the PC, and this isn't a emulation port or anything. This is a full from the ground up fan project port, which is really cool.
It is pretty interesting because it is like, you're putting it in a different engine, and that's going to create like different effects. Like I've seen like the text in game is like animated in it. There's like the way that the weapons are used are done as sprites, and like corpses disappear after certain stuff. There's like colored animated lighting effects and stuff. And for a Quake user, this is probably a like different experience from its software engine that they were originally using. And also like the video has a Sega logo on it at the beginning. I don't know if that will be in this port.
I hope so, but it's been made by a fan, JC, where are they? Called JC Erisden, and essentially she's actually started working on it around the time the Quake HD version that came out last year. She started working on it around the same time that actually came out, so September 2021. And she said that it was quite a slow burn to begin with, but recently she's actually managed to port all the levels over to PC, and it's working in the engine. It's generating the levels really well. And the most recent update from July 2017 is she's now got all the sprites. So, like the sprite weapons, like you just mentioned, Ravi, they're all working in the engine now. So, her aim is to have it a one for one remake. Like, she doesn't want to cut any corners. She doesn't want to change anything. She doesn't want to use anything from any of the other versions of Quake. And she wants it to have, that Sega Saturn look to it as well, which, from the screenshots and from the video so far, she's got a couple of videos out, testing the sprite weapons and stuff like that with the sound effects and stuff. It's looking really cool. And then, interestingly, there's actually a hidden voice-acted comic book that you can unlock.
Yeah, have you seen that? The Dank and Scuzz Easter egg?
I haven't seen it, but no, it's a comic book, like a voice-acted comic book exclusive to the Sega Saturn version, and that is going to be in this PC version as well. What is that? Is it a silly thing or?
Yeah, it's a hidden Easter egg in the game, yeah. So I watched a YouTube video of it before we recorded. I haven't seen it in the game, but yeah, it's pretty much that, just a little jokey kind of
fair enough
voice-acted comic, yeah. So the fact that the Easter eggs have been ported into it too, I think, obviously that's a fan favourite for fans of the Sega Saturn version of Quake. So it's nice to see that in there as well. And those 4 original levels that didn't feature in any other version of Quake that haven't been ported anywhere else.
We hear a lot about Doom ports and the variety and the difference of Doom on different systems, but I don't hear that much about Quake and Quake on different systems and how they change. So I'm interested to actually check this one out.
Yeah, because it kind of follows on from, we're talking about the N64 version of Doom and how that's been ported to modern systems a couple of weeks ago, weren't we?
Yeah.
And there are, certain systems do have their own custom versions and kind of where they just went a bit, different and they made separate levels and different graphics. So I think for completionist's sake, it is good to have those available on modern platforms as well. Because a lot of people, I've never played Saturn version of Quake. I think I've got it in my collection. Don't think I've ever really played it though. So it will be quite interesting to see this properly. So if you want to keep an eye on that project, it's in development right now. Hopefully available to play very soon. I'll put that in our show notes as well. Now we need to talk about the comeback of LimeWire in just a moment, which is like the most bizarre story I've seen recently. And a very interesting controller for the new Mega Drive Mini 2 in just a minute. Before we do that, though, it is our favourite weekend of the month coming up on Sunday evening. We're going to crack open a drink, get to completely geek out with some of our good mates because it's going to be our patrons hangout on Sunday evening. And it does feel like these come around so quickly these days. But if you haven't hopped on one of these before, now would be a very good time to join us on Patreon. Sunday evening, we're all going to get together. It is just a complete geek fest, isn't it? We have so much fun.
Yeah, man, I absolutely love it. And I'm just accepting now and getting it like excited that like I go on it and I get so excited from talking to everybody that I just go and buy games and spend money. Like I really, really, really enjoy it. And
don't fight it, Joe.
I'm not fighting it anymore. I'm just accepting what it is. But I absolutely love it when new people join as well. And not everybody has to join in. You don't have to come on camera or anything like that. If you just want to come and watch the chatter and sit back and have a drink or even play some original Xbox while you're doing it or anything like that, you can do. But it is always really cool when people get involved and show off what they've been buying, show off their games rooms, or in some cases their game museums. It's really exciting, fun stuff.
I also, there's one thing that we don't really mention that much, which is basically we do a couple of extra stories for the patrons. Yeah. So if you're listening to the podcast, you may get a bit more than the usual retro kind of over the hour. It may get a bit longer because we do 2 extra stories for patrons and there's lots of exclusive bonuses.
Yeah, you get the normal episode ad-free, you get it early most weeks as well. And like Ravi said, you get about 10, 15 minutes of extra content in there as well. So very good time to join us on Patreon. And I'm pleased to say we've had a couple of new Patreon members come along in the last week. So that means we get to hear Ravi's lovely singing voice.
Hall of Fame!
And making the Hall of Fame this week, a massive thank you to our latest Patreon supporters, Edwin van den Oosterkamp,
Michael Nicholson,
who both joined us on Patreon this week. We massively appreciate your support. And if you'd like to find yourself in the Hall of Fame, all the details to join us on Patreon are on our website at theretrohour.com. Now, we're going to be chatting to Peter Connelly about composing Tomb Raider in just a few minutes. Before that, a couple more quick stories to get through. Now, this is a headline I didn't expect to read in 2022. LimeWire is back.
It's back.
And maybe not everyone used to use LimeWire back in the day.
It back.
What was LimeWire then, Ravi, for the uninitiated? I'm sure you know.
LimeWire was when the craze of peer-to-peer networks came out. P2P, before you download it off a website, and then Napster came out and you would download off another computer and you would start sharing your files. And then Napster got knocked down by Metallica and Dr. Dre and a lot of people that were angry at them, and they turned into a kind of legitimate service and started changing it. Up popped a lot of different services, and they were stuff like LimeWire, BearShare, I think Kazoo was another one.
Kazaa,
yeah, that was it, yeah.
Audio Galaxy, I remember that one. Audio Galaxy was a good one.
Yeah, and they were on, I think it was the Gnutella network, which was a very strange kind of network. There was Direct Connect Plus as well, and all I remember about LimeWire, it was so dodgy. Like, you'd download something, it would never be what it was labeled. Probably contain a Trojan or a virus. And trying
to get an MP3 file and it was a .exe.
Yeah, exactly. And I think LimeWire was like, Napster, you'd actually be able to find the content before the filters came. LimeWire, it was so hit or miss. You'd have to download like 4 copies and then run them whilst you've got all your virus checkers and everything going. What are your memories of LimeWire?
I was always quite good with LimeWire, making sure stuff wasn't viruses and stuff, but I showed my mum LimeWire and she just destroyed our computer, I really tried to teach her, how to spot things, what's an MP3 and stuff like that. But I also always remember in around about 2003, a friend of mine in art class saying that he was downloading the Daredevil film over LimeWire, and I was like, oh my God, that's going to take all weekend. And he was like, yeah, man. And I came in on the Friday and I came in on the Monday morning over the weekend. I was like, how was the Daredevil film? And he was like, oh, I downloaded and I played it. And it was the Wild Thornberrys movie. And I was like, I bet that was disappointing. I was like, what did you do? And he was like, well, I watched the Wild Thornberrys movie. It took me 2 days to download. So, got some.
There were two reasons stuff like that happened. I remember it was either users who wanted a bit of kudos and they would, intentionally relabel something to make it seem like they had a new movie first. But also, I remember downloading a movie over something like LimeWire, and then again, it took like all weekend. and then watching it, and it was literally just a Sony logo, like zooming in and out. Like Sony had actually uploaded a fake movie onto the server, to waste people's time intentionally.
Wasn't there? I could be wrong, but wasn't there like a video of like, or it might have been LimeWire, but it was Madonna complaining about people illegally downloading her music. And she uploaded it as a song, and it became like the most downloaded thing in the world.
It was the Record Industry Association of America, the RIAA, and they were the guys that kind of got the stars on and started shutting down Napster and stuff. And to be honest, they were right. Let's face it. Look at stuff like iTunes and Spotify now. People will pay for that stuff.
But I think they wouldn't have come along if it wasn't for services like Napster.
No,
because
for
the
sure.
record industry desperately wanted us to pay 18 quid for a CD album instead of, getting it for free, obviously.
Yeah, and they blamed a lot of stuff on there. And I do you even remember this? When LimeWire went down or it had a blocking code, FrostWire came in 2004, if you remember FrostWire, which was like another version of LimeWire. Why are we talking about LimeWire?
Well, that's the thing, because obviously these were... before you could buy legitimate music online, for a couple of years, this was really the only way to get MP3s. And then suddenly, obviously, the record industry realised, right, we need legit services, iTunes and all that came along, Spotify later on. But really, it was a thing of the time, the early 2000s, these peer-to-peer networks. But now, 20 years later, LimeWire has returned. Kind of. Now, it's been relaunched as an NFT marketplace, and they're saying this is for art and entertainment. Initially, it's going to be focused on music, but the thing is, if you watch the advert, and I'll put this in our show notes as well, there's an article all about it on Adweek, but the trailer that they've got for it really heavily leans on nostalgia, doesn't it?
It does, but everything's wrong in it. It's so wrong.
I was going to say the same.
Yeah, they're playing Soldier Boy, which for a start, if you're going to launch something, don't have any association with Soldier Boy.
And that song was from 2007, which I don't know about you guys. I wasn't using. You look at this. They've got like a beige PC with a CRT monitor and the burning CDs. I wasn't doing that in 2007.
I was far beyond that by 2007, yeah.
I had my iPhone in 2007.
Yeah, and they've got like that modern kind of boombox that came out like a lot later on as well and stuff. And it is interesting because it's kind of like they're focusing on just literally piracy in the in the advert. They're downloading an MP3. It's the right MP3, and they're straight away like listening to the Soldier Boy track, and then it zooms into the future, and they're grown up, and they run upstairs and download NFTs.
So it's really, the only thing this has got in common with LimeWire is the name, and obviously that was founded back in 2000 by a guy called Mark Gorton, who was a former Wall Street trader, but now it's owned by a completely different company, two brothers called Paul and Julian, who now own the LimeWire trademark, which I'm actually quite surprised, being, the fact that it was a piracy service, I'm quite surprised it was even a trademark that you could sell.
Yeah, like, I thought, these had become too toxic, and everybody had kind of moved on from these brands, but actually thinking about it, Napster did, like, legitimize a bit. Maybe.
And I think, it's at an age now where people who use those are going to be nostalgic for it. I've actually got a Napster t-shirt that I ordered randomly off eBay one day, and I wore it to work, and I was like, oh my God, I remember Napster. So I think it is kind of, that we are 20 years on, there's kind of a generation that's becoming nostalgic for their youth that was, the early 2000s. But really, NFTs have got a very bad rap, and obviously we're not the podcast that really talks about NFTs, but really they're saying that the aim of this is going to be to kind of claw back a bit from these big services like Spotify and put it back into the hands of the users and the artists as well, and kind of cut out that middleman, which is very ambitious.
I think they'd probably do better if they just did music. To be honest.
They are at first, apparently.
Okay, so there is a music aspect of it.
Yeah, that's going to be what it is at first. It's pretty much going to be to sell NFTs, to buy music on there. But I think, the fact that NFTs have kind of got that reputation of being that bored ape yacht club, millionaire kids who just want to waste money on their own JPEG file that no one else could have, be part of an exclusive club. It gets a bad rep for that, but I think the underlying technology, it does kind of seem like if you're getting into kind of Web3 and the metaverse and all these other buzzwords right now, it'd be interesting if LimeWire ended up being kind of one of the changing points of the industry there, wouldn't it? It actually ended up becoming like really pivotal in that
What an
change.
awful future we're living in. If you went in the past and you were like, right, LimeWire's the future, you're like, no, we're screwed. Yeah.
Yeah, if you were those kids in that video woke up 20 years later and he's still using LimeWire, that'd be a pretty depressing future, wouldn't it?
And still listening to Soulja Boy.
I'd love to be able to turn around and say, I still use it, guys. Like...
The last guy on the original LimeWire. Do you guys remember mp3.com as well? That was another one. Yeah.
Don't know that one.
Do you remember, though, what they used to do? They'd make examples of people. I remember hearing stories about, like a kid who'd download a song.
Yeah, wasn't
on
there
Kazaa or something like that?
Like kid or granny who downloaded like nursery rhymes and they were like, right, let's sue her to hell. It was like...
they sued them for like $10 million.
Yeah, for like 4 nursery rhymes or something.
Yeah, which I think, was a big reason that kind of those services faded away, obviously on top of the legitimate services like iTunes and stuff as well. So, interesting to see it back. I mean, they're using the original font and the original logo and everything as well. So, really just trading on nostalgia, which for something that kind of positions itself as, the future is an interesting concept. But, LimeWire is back. So if you want to read more about that, I'll put that in our show notes as well. Now, one more quick story to get into. Mega Drive Mini 2, I think that's been announced now that it's coming out in October in America. That has been confirmed now. But it seems like as well, there is going to be a rather interesting controller that Sega have announced for the Mega Drive Mini 2. And this thing looks a little bit odd, to say the least, for most Mega Drive games.
Yeah, so essentially this is it's based on the classic Sharp Cyberstick, which I'm not actually familiar with, but from my research, essentially you used it for Afterburner with the original Mega Drive in Japan. And essentially this is going to be a USB version of it, which will work with the Mega Drive Mini, which has recently been announced that it is getting a Western release on the same date as the Japanese release. But as far as I know, there's been no talk on the controller, this USB Cyberstick controller coming out in the West. At the moment, it's just a Japanese exclusive, but it is going to be fully compatible with the Mega Drive Mini 2, and it's obviously going to be USB powered, which begs the question, will it work on other, USB kind of devices? Can you play SNES Mini with it and stuff like that? Probably we will work, just with like mapping and stuff like that. I don't know about you guys, but essentially it looks like a flight stick to me. And and the other games it's compatible with are written in Japanese, so I'm not too sure.
There's not many of them though, is there?
There's not many of them, no. So I'm assuming it's working on kind of Mega Drive flight sim games or flight combat games, which is pretty interesting. But as an avid Sega fan, I'm really not familiar with this. What about you, Ravi? Have you seen this before?
I'm kind of clueless about this. It does look like a PC flight stick mixed with like a mech walker kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or an old 90s VR system. But I'm surprised about the size of it as well. You're releasing a mini console. You can have this tiny console and then this huge kind of a stick. It kind of goes against the Japanese philosophy of, small and cute and what they're kind of doing with the mini consoles.
You're sitting with this great big controller on your lap. But, I guess it's for, the nostalgia of it, sitting there on your couch playing Afterburner 2, flying through the sky like shooting down planes and stuff like that on your
I don't think this thing would fit on my couch.
Yeah.
It does look cool though, everybody's used to playing with like joypads and stuff. Maybe this is just gonna like take you back with this kind of real arcade style.
But yeah, it looks pretty cool, and I do love how Sega do release these things, like the plastic Power of Tower they did with the Mega Drive Mini 1, and obviously they're doing the Sega CD 2 with this one as well. So, they do take it seriously. It's just interesting that they had their 60th anniversary last year or the year before, and they did the Game Gear Mini, and now all of a sudden they're doing all these crazy things, which I think are much more interesting. That's just classic
It's
Sega.
bizarre they're bringing this out, though, instead of something like the arcade stick, to me, would be a more logical choice. Why don't they make a version of that instead?
It's one of them, though. It probably turns out that this Cyberstick probably sold millions of them in Japan. And, maybe we will get the arcade stick, which would be really cool to get that, play a bit of Street Fighter on it or something.
They need the activator mini. So if you had your dog or your cat, you can chuck it in the activator mini.
The Menacer Mini
in games, yeah, or your little kid.
What was the name of that other one? What Sega did, where it was like it was a pack that you wore on your chest and back, and it vibrated when you got hit in games and stuff.
Yeah, it's like a body shock.
Yeah, like a body shock thing. My friend has 2 of them, so and keeps saying we should play games against each other with them, but I haven't done it yet. But yeah, it vibrates and like it's meant to like jolt you, isn't it?
How good would that be for like virtual reality?
Yeah, it would be. Bring it back, Sega. Not the cyber stick.
So apparently it's going to be out in Japan on the same day that the Mega Drive Mini 2 comes out. That's October 27th. No one in a Western release yet, as you said, but we'll keep an eye on that story. If you want to read that and everything else we talked about, you'll find them all in our show notes. No need to Google around. I put them all in your podcast app or on our website at theretrohour.com. Now we're going to be talking Tomb Raider with our special guest, Peter Connelly. He's coming up in just a moment. Before we do that, let's take a quick second to give a big thank you to this week's sponsor, and that is our very good friends at ExpressVPN. Now, I think it's fair to say we're all big fans of Netflix and other online video streaming services. Kind of feel a bit like sometimes I've kind of watched everything I want to see on Netflix. Don't know about you guys. I think it's called doom scrolling, isn't it? Where you just go through and you're like,
and also during COVID, I kind of just locked down and rinsed Netflix totally.
Yeah, I think I watched everything on the British Netflix during 2020. But if you're paying for Netflix, actually there's a lot more out there than you get access to normally. So if you're watching Netflix without using ExpressVPN, it's a bit like going to a casino and only being able to play on the slot machines. Why limit yourself? The big money is somewhere else. So actually, by using ExpressVPN, you can access different Netflix libraries that have got completely different content, different movies, different TV series, and you can access these from each country from the comfort of your own home. And I know you're a big fan of the American Netflix in particular, Ravi.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. And like ExpressVPN, it streams in HD and there's like zero buffering, and it also has servers in 94 countries. Now, what I've been watching on the American Netflix is the awesome Walking Dead, if you like that. Stargate SG-1 as well. I love Stargate, one of the greats, and we even talk about Stargate a bit in the interview, actually. And before social media, before all of that, you had email. And You've Got Mail is also an awesome film with Tom Hanks and Dave Chappelle.
You love your rom-coms, don't you?
I love rom-coms, yeah.
So you can get access to these different Netflix libraries. There are so many of them all around the world. If you're into like, anime and stuff like that, you can watch the Japanese Netflix. There's so much you can access. So why limit yourself to just one library of Netflix? And actually, it works with other services too, like BBC iPlayer, YouTube, Hulu, stuff like that as well. With servers in 94 countries, it's compatible with all your devices too, phones, laptops, consoles, smart TVs, and a lot more. So stop paying full price for these streaming services and only getting access to a fraction of their content. You can get your full money's worth by using our exclusive link at expressvpn.com/retro. They will know that we sent you, and you'll get 3 months free on a 1-year plan. So try it right now. Support the podcast, expressvpn.com/retro. And a big thank you to our friends at ExpressVPN for their support. Right then, next, we're going to be getting some stories about composing music for those later Tomb Raider games with our special guest, Peter Connelly. He's next on the Retro Hour podcast. You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it is time for our favourite bit of the show when we welcome on our very special guest. Now today we're so excited to get some stories from soundtracks on amazing games, including the Tomb Raider series from Tomb Raider 3 to the Angel of Darkness and lots more as well. Let's welcome on our special guest this week, Peter Connelly. How are you doing, Peter?
I'm doing fine, thank you very much. Thank you for the invite. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, really appreciate you coming on. Now, before we get into these incredible games and this massive series that you've worked on, we always kind of like to go back to day one and kind of find out what initially sparked your interest in the games industry. I mean, do you remember way back when you were a kid, kind of your first video game experience then, like where it all began for you?
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I'm a big C64 fan. I used to I bought games purely for the music, the Rob Hubbard soundtracks, the classics back in the day. It wasn't the game for me. It was always the music, I can't think of any game off the top of my head, but, I particularly went out and bought, especially for the music, but I would probably say pretty much all of it, if I'm being honest. But yeah, I remember listening back to the likes of, Mark Hooksey, Rob Hubbard, So yeah, it was just listening back to that. I used to love reading the Zap 64, and you know how there would be music charts every month, kind of thing. You know, Crazy Comets would be number one month. You know, of course, the Guns would be number one the next month. It was always just something to kind of be aspired to. And I remember listening and thinking, you know what, do I want to do that? So, you know, that's pretty much the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing now.
It's quite interesting. We had Rob Hubbard on the show, and he basically said he didn't think that there'd be a music industry with video games. He thought it would just be like a little quick niche. Did you kind of think that, or did you think there might be a future in this?
I always thought there'd be a future in this. I mean, with the, you know, when the music competition got quite fierce on the C64, I mean, everyone was really trying to push the boundaries and push the envelope, you know, and squeezing so much out of a tiny processor, you know. That I just thought, you know, this is going somewhere. And I really believed, I mean, you know, it'd be great if we could kind of relive that era and stay in that era. But, you know, things evolved, things moved on. But I also knew there was going to be a future, but I'd never thought it would be as big as where it is right now. I mean, you go from, you know, your 3-channel SID music with a sample channel, and now you've got this, you know, full-on orchestral score, 100 plus musicians, you know, performing in the same kind of genre as what a film score would have been back in the day, you know. So it's evolved quite a lot, quite quickly over the years. I think it's going to evolve as well. I think it's going to carry on down the path it's gone.
Did you kind of get into demo scene music, or like any of the music discs or anything like that?
I didn't, you know. It's one regret I've got. I mean, I really wanted to kind of get into that scene. An old core colleague of mine was quite heavily into that. But no, I think at that time I was more interested in kind of exploring the MIDI side of music production. It's something I wish I'd have done more of, but I didn't, unfortunately. I mean, I did dabble with Soundtrack and Pro Track and this, that, and the other, but you know, I was never as apt as what some of these demos that were coming out at the time. I was more focused on making orchestral arrangements or kind of live sound and instrumentations.
And the stuff that they could do on the 64, I mean, you know, Rob Hubbard in particular, I remember, you know, soundtracks like Delta and Commando and International Karate. I mean, some of them, I mean, I think the International Karate track on that was like 15 minutes long.
It's
like, you know,
crazy, isn't it? I mean, the boundaries and envelopes they were pushing to get that kind of level of excitement in the game, you know. I mean, where he would switch from one, you know, they all did it by then, but he would switch from one sound to the next sound and make it sound, you know, kind of more multi-channel than the 3 channels you were kind of limited to. So yeah, it was just wow, you know. I love the story as well. I'm sure most people know this anyway, but the story when he's working on Commando at Elite, he basically stayed overnight when everyone went home, done the track, had it loaded up on everyone's C64 the next day when they came in, and this is great, you know. But to get this music, we're going to have to remove a level, and that's how focused and how well received music was on the C64 back then, that they were quite prepared to remove a level to keep the music in place, you know. It's you wouldn't get that now.
What about personally then? How did you kind of get into making music yourself then? I mean, what was kind of your setup back in the day when you started making it?
I started making it. I think I started off with Rock Monitor on the C64, which kind of like went over my head a bit. It was too, I mean, obviously I understand it now retrospectively, but I was kind of, you know, I got stuck in with Music X on the Amiga and a Roland U20 keyboard. That was kind of, you know, when I kind of got that set up, a minimal setup, I was quite, that was where I started to focus in on. But musically, I've always played instruments right from a very early age. Yeah, I started off playing the guitar when I was about 5 or 6. I played the cello when I was 9 or 10. I played the recorder, violin, drums, this, that, and the other, you know, but I never kind of got into the technology side until possibly mid to late 80s.
So, were you using like live instruments with MIDI then as well? And what setup were you using for that?
No, I just sequenced and recorded everything through. I didn't even have a sampler back then, if I'm being honest. You know, I used to have had this kind of snobbery about sampling. I don't know why, whereas I love sampling now. So yeah, I just basically sequenced everything. You know, I had, like I said, I had a Roland U20, which had really nice pianos and strings, and you know, and sample stuff on there. Nothing too extravagant, but it kind of nice bread and butter sounds. And I just kind of at that point tried to make things sound realistic. And I used to program stuff so it wasn't as mechanical as what it would be, you know, on a sort of like a 16-step sequencer kind of thing. So that was pretty much how I started, you know. I just tried to make things sound as I mean, you know, I'll probably listen back to some of the stuff I did back in the 89, 90, and I'll probably think, oh, you know, what the hell was I thinking? But, you know, it's I think I was trying to get somewhere at that point to try and prove that I could make things sound a little bit more natural. Because at that age, I didn't have the finances to hire, live players or a real orchestra. So, I tried to get what I could out of the equipment I had at the time.
Well, what music styles were you into at the time then, and who were you listening to, and did any of those influence you?
I think so. I've got quite a diverse love of music. I've never been the type that will like a particular type of music. It's just whatever inspires me. If I hear a kick drum that just resonates, I like that track because of the kick drum, or it might just be a little synth hook in there that just like kind of like, yeah, I really like that. Doesn't matter who did it or how it was done. If it kind of piqued my interest, that's where I took interest in. But if I did have to nail it down to a specific band or bands, I would think people like the Pet Shop Boys. I think what I did was kind of backed off what they were doing. They were using modern technology, samplers, Fairlights, emulators, etc., to try and make sounds or compositions which had a bit of realism in them. That's the kind of inspiration I took. So, I mean, obviously I didn't have the finances to be able to buy a Fairlight or, to sit in the studio and do things the way they did stuff. But that was probably my primary source of influence.
Or buy any of the costumes that they would wear as well.
Yeah, that's it. That's just another thing on top of it. You've got to wear them costumes to be in the zone, so.
Yeah, true. I was wondering how you got involved with NMS software. And
NMS software, yeah.
And Mass Destruction, which came out in 1997.
Do we need to talk about that? Okay. I think were they the first company I worked for? No, I worked for another company before, about 6 months to a year before that. It was a small kind of startup company. It's what got my foot through the door. Even though the company didn't last too long, it kind of went into liquidation within about 3 to 6 months of working there. But it did give me a little bit of experience, a little bit of insight into, how the sound side of thing and the music side of things work with video games. So that kind of led us to apply to more places. And I think I got the job with NMS in '96. And oddly, I was interviewed by a guy, and I didn't recognize him at the time. But when I saw on his mouse map the name Cooksey, I thought, okay, this is Mark Cooksey. So things kind of went slightly different in terms of how we kind of communicated through the interview. But that was just a case of applying to adverts that I saw in Edge magazine at the time. I just used to sort of dish out cassettes at the time. With covering letters and just, hope that I got a bite, and eventually I got a bite. So, and I was there for about a year and a half before I moved to a company that were based in Lancaster, and they lasted about a year, and that was around the time I started core design. So, it's like, it was kind of stop, start for a while.
Well, obviously then, I mean, when we had consoles like the PlayStation and the Saturn, a lot of it was CD-based audio.
Yes.
And were you working on those systems at the time, and what was kind of developing actual audio for the Sega Saturn like? 'Cause I know you're working on that.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, the Sega Saturn, I didn't work specifically directly with that. Everything was done on PC or PlayStation and then was ported over. If anything, if any conversions needed doing with regards to the sounds we were kind of supplying for the video games, we would do whatever. But most of the time, you just handed over the assets in a way it went. It was kind of done kind of without you thinking about it. But I've always worked with CD audio. Unfortunately, I've never done any kind of tracker projects or any of that kind of thing. It's something I would love to have done. I have done sort of tracker projects since, but very minimal, But yeah, and that was kind of my goal anyway. I always like the idea of things being produced in a studio, a stereo WAV, with realistic type of sounds, So yeah, the music I was also involved with was always based upon Red Book standards.
Did you do any sound effects at any point? Because I saw one called a Flesh Feast on your list as well. And there was lots of interesting zombie noises and sound effects in that.
Oh my god, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I see myself as a composer, and that's what I always kind of brand myself as. But when I actually look back at my CV and my backlog of work, I've done more sound design work than music work. I've done very few projects where I've worked on both. But in the beginning, yeah, it was a one-man band. You were expected to write. You were classified as a composer or a musician, and you were expected to do sound design too, or sound effects. The whole hierarchy of disciplines is completely, kind of like branched out right now. But back then it was, you did the music and you did the sound too.
I could just imagine trying to get the sound effects for a zombie game based in a shopping mall. It must have been quite funny.
It's hilarious. I mean, I can't specifically remember exactly how I did that, but it was. I do remember moments where we got different people in for, programmers, artists, whatever. Just can you come into the studio for like 5 minutes and just do a couple of raws and who's and whatever. And it was hilarious. It was absolutely hilarious. Some of the guys absolutely nailed it and made it sound great. Other people just came in and it was just hilarious because it was so like cheesy, it was stereotypical of cheesiness. It was hilarious, but I actually lost it once. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning, been working late, and somebody came in and did a couple of whoos, and it was just so funny that I couldn't stop crying for about an hour with laughter. It was just like, this poor guy, I don't think he's ever done any kind of recording ever since. I must have put him right off, but yeah, it's interesting to do stuff like that. It is, I really do. I like this kind of I mean, the imps on Tomb Raider 5, is it? That's me laughing sadistically, and then I pitched it up by 24 or 12 semitones, and that's the sound. I just love doing that kind of thing, just doing something a little bit odd.
I love that because a lot of old video games you'd get like staff at the studio in the FMV, or you'd have like staff doing the soundtracks.
Yeah, exactly.
I just love that. It feels so personal.
At Core Design, there was a couple of guys we used to use there, and one of them was absolutely amazing, and we used him for everything. He was so diverse. He could do he couldn't speak multiple languages, but he could kind of come across, he would speak English, but it would sound American or it would sound French, what I mean? And he was so good at doing that. And then we would get the proper, I do with inverted commas, the proper recons in it. To be honest, he was better than them most of the time. So, I would just say, well, let's just stick with using his takes because the work,
Well, you mentioned that you made the move, down to Derby to Core. How did you get the job there then, and what was it like when you started there?
Just after I worked for In Games Interactive, which folded early 1998. I forget, it was such a long time ago. I worked at Nissan building cars for about 6 months because there was nothing else going at the time, and I knew in the Sunderland area there was some temporary jobs going. So I thought, keeps the synths being bought. So I was working there, and then this job came up with Core Design. So I remember going for the interview, and I just thought I'll never get a job at Core Designs, but I'll get the day off, so I'll head down there and see what goes on. And then within 2 or 3 months, it all kind of went through, and I got offered the job, and I was like, wow, okay. I was nervous. I was excited. I think I had quite a lot of feelings and emotion going on. Thinking, at the time I didn't know I was going to be working on Tomb Raider. I just assumed I'd be working on what other games I had going at the time, and I was quite nervous that I might not kind of meet their match. Nathan did such a good job with what he done, and I was technically replacing him, and I just thought I've got some big boots to fill here. I have to make a good go of it. And you're always a little bit worried that you're not going to hit the mark, but I really enjoyed it. Within the first week, I felt like I knew everybody. Things just progressed from that.
Well, obviously, Tomb Raider by then, it was already a massive brand.
It was, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, how did you feel when you found out you were working on that? Then was it like a lot of pressure to deliver on that then?
Same again. I think it was just an exaggerated version of me actually getting the job at Core Design. I never expected for 1 minute. When I first moved to Core Design, I was put straight on to Hurdy-Gurdy, and I started doing a collage of ideas for that. And Jeremy Heath Smith, he heard the music collage that I did for that, which incidentally went on to be the theme tune. So if you ever hear the theme tune, you can hear it kind of chop and change, and that was originally intended as a collage of ideas.
Right.
But he heard that, and he really liked what I did, and then he called me up to the office and just says, right, we want you working on the next Tomb Raider. And seriously, my insides imploded. It's like, okay, now this has gone to the next step of I've got to kind of prove myself, So I think when I'm under pressure, I tend to focus a little bit better. So, when that kind of pressure's applied, I feel that I try a lot harder. So in a way, it's a good thing. But seriously, it took a while for me to kind of neutralize my emotions.
Yeah, finding out you're suddenly working on the biggest game franchise in the world.
Exactly, yeah. I had to kind of detach myself from that thought, because I think the more you think about it, the more anxious you become. So you just kind of think, okay, I'm just going to work. I'm just doing some music. They either like it or they don't. And then it hits you, okay.
Did you have kind of like a Passover of stuff with Nathan McCree, and did he like kind of talk to you and tell you like about the kind of vibes of the previous Tomb Raider soundtracks, or did you go and check them out yourselves?
Yeah, I went out and checked my stuff. I mean, one of the first things I did when I got put onto the project was I'd already played the games because I'd bought Tomb Raider 2 the year before I started, so I was familiar with the games and the franchise. But I really, when I knew I was working on it, I wanted to kind of scrutinize it and go through it from A to Z and make sure that where I was heading was kind of a good bit to progress. Continuation, yeah, that's a better word. Yeah, from where Nathan was, because Nathan did a really good job, and like I say, there were big boots to fill. There's a lot of expectations, but I never had any liaison with him with regard to that. I mean, the first time I met Nathan was during my interview. He was kind of just finishing up, packing up, etc., etc. And Martin Iverson, who I ended up working with, he was on holiday at that time, so he wasn't there to interview. So it was mainly Adrian Smith and Nathan McCree. And we had a bit of a chin wag, as you do, in the studio about this, that, and the other. And when I got off the job, by that point, Nathan had gone and moved on to pastures new, and there was none of this kind of like handover stuff going on. I just basically had to analyse what had been done and just hopefully kept it going in the way it did. I did want to put up my own twist on it, but I didn't want to take away the original feel and motif of the franchise.
I mean, were you given much creative freedom then, or was it like a kind of a brief that you had to stick to? How did that kind of work?
It was pretty much, yeah, it felt like to me it was total creative freedom. I think if something was really wrong, they would say something about it, but otherwise everything was deemed accepted. I think that's a good thing. I think when you're, a lot of the companies I've worked with since, you do get a kind of brief, and everyone's got an idea on the head of what they want. If you don't deliver that, if they're not open-minded, it can be quite difficult to convince them to accept what you're doing. Whereas with the music of core design, we had so much creative freedom. I think it was just accepted, like I say, unless it was completely way off the mark. You were just left to your own devices, really. It was a really good way of working because it just felt like you could do what you want to do, but within reason. You still know in your mind where you need to be heading, but you just don't have somebody stand over you and tell you which way you need to go. So it was a good way of working.
I was wondering what the setup at Core was like. Did they have like loads of new equipment and a kind of sound studio and stuff? And was it like part of the team or a separate place?
Yeah, it was in the same building. We had our own rooms. There was always two, there was always two audio rooms, me and Martin. And they were pretty identical, we both had the same mixing desk. For my life, can't remember what they were. We did get them upgraded to Soundcrafts at one point. But, we had, for the time, a powerful PC. We both had Trinity version 3s, had JV1080s. Martin had a JD800, which... now I look back and think I wish I did, but we're pretty spoilt. I mean, I remember I think when I was looking at upgrading some of the kit at one point, I just went up to Adrian Smith, and says, I would love an S3200 XL or an S3000 XL and a Trinity version 3, which has the Prophecy board installed, and he just gives us his company credit card and says just order it. So I did. And then he came down 10 minutes out and said to Martin, "Do you want one too?" So Martin got one. I was like, wow, it was just like, get what you got, get what you want. But obviously you respect the fact that you got what you wanted, so you never abused it. It was quite cool. It was quite relaxed.
And was there always kind of an aim to do quite orchestral music? And I always wondered if that was kind of due to Laura's British roots and her being quite upper class.
I think so, yeah. I mean, Nathan started that whole orchestral thing going off with Tomb Raider, so you kind of have to carry on with that tradition, I mean, that was all done using JV1080s with the orchestral expansion board. I had 2, maybe 3 of them at one point, and they were all kind of wired into the mixing desk with the DP4 and then a Sonic DP4 Plus, I think it was, reverb unit. And I had it set up so like a symphonic orchestra, so the violins were to the left. If you're looking from the conductor's perspective, the violins on the left, violas slightly to the left, and then your cello slightly to the right, and your bass is to the right, and your brass behind, woodwind behind. So it was set up, I remember having this sheet that I just used to kind of like stick on the wall. So, if I got lost where instrumentation needed to be placed, I could just refer to that. But yeah, the intention was always it should sound like a symphonic orchestra. And I think also, I mean, at least for me later on, the intention was to have this performed by a real orchestra. So if the opportunity ever came along where they said, right, we've got this huge budget, let's get a real orchestra player, we're kind of pretty much ready to kind of just make that transferal. That's pretty much what we did for Angel of Darkness. We knew where we were going with Angel of Darkness. We knew it was going to be orchestral, performed by a live orchestra. So we could do what we did previously, but we didn't have to kind of polish it because we knew it was going to be produced properly in the studio.
So you joined pretty much, they'd finished development on Tomb Raider 2, Tomb Raider 3.
Yeah.
But you were doing the kind of sound for it. Did they leave like a lot of triggers in and places that they said, this is going to happen, there's going to be a sound event, there's going to be this build up in a level, or did you have to kind of go through and choose all that and design it?
No, I mean, on 3, I'll be honest with you, I only did a bit of sound design work. I mean, that was all done by Martin Iverson. Done a great job. There was some technological changes as well on that from the previous 2. But it was forward that I really got my hands dirty, which, it was pretty much me doing everything. I had to do all the sound design, do the music, do the animations, the cutscenes, the localizations. But basically what happened was towards the end of the project, when the levels were pretty much built and all the gameplay was pretty much in place, you would get each level designer just come in and sit with you, take you through the level in the editor and say, at this point here, a rat jumps out on you, whatever, or there's going to be a vista moment where, the camera will pan and they would say, okay, then we'll use this piece of music, we'll use that piece of music, we'll use that incidental piece of music. And then they would drop a trigger down. So when you pass that point, so you didn't sit and go through it on your own. You actually went through with the level designer artist.
I guess it was like composing for a film then, if you're kind of doing it in that way.
It was, yeah. The only annoying thing was when because it was CD based, when something jumped out on you, you still had the 2-second gap before the music started, so it wasn't in sync with the actual action. So you would get the dog jumping out at you, whatever, and then you'll get the music, and then the music would fade out, and then the ambience would come back. So different now. You can do so much more now, but back in the day when you were triggering CD tracks, it was a lot different.
Well, how early on did you get the storylines and the FMVs, and was that kind of constantly changing and updating, were they kind of tweaking stuff quite a bit?
Oh god, yeah. The tweaks are unreal. It's nice to be able to work on an FMV or a cutscene, cinematic, whatever, when it's locked down. But one thing I've learned, lockdown doesn't mean lockdown. It just means it's all right until they decide it wants changing. I mean, there was one particular cutscene I remember. I thought, okay, it's locked down. I'll do my pass on it now. And I think I went back to, because everything was on the server, you updated, etc., etc. I went back to it the next day, and everything was kind of the other way around. So rather than Laura walk off to the left, she walked off to the right. So you had to kind of flip everything. Yeah, the storylines come quite early. The FMV cutscenes come quite late. They don't really do much with the cutscenes until the levels are built, so you don't get much of it. I mean, sometimes you might get a bit of a wireframe idea, a wireframe render, so you can get an idea of what's going to go on, so you compile your sounds, kind of line up some, you can't be specific about what frame they're going to land on until you know it's actually locked down. But yeah, they come quite late. But with regards to level creation, I mean, like I said, everything was on the server, so you would just grab latest, etc., and a lot of the time when I composed, I would just have a level that maybe had 2 rooms with Laura kind of just floating, looking at the room kind of thing. And that would be my inspiration to write some music. So I would just kind of put my hands over the keyboard and just move things around until it just kind of fitted with the visuals that I saw. That was kind of, some of the times you would just write something, think, okay, I really like that kind of vibe. That sounds like it would work with Tomb Raider. And, 99% of the time it just worked, or it had a place somewhere along the line in a cutscene. Maybe it's later it would drop in, and when the artists level designers came in, it would just drop in on a level. So there was a bit of kind of like blindness in the way you work, but also you had stuff to work to. So it was a best of both worlds, I suppose.
I've always been quite interested in, so obviously it's a creative process, and I guess there's got to be days when you're just kind of not in the zone, and other days where you really are. I mean, in terms of kind of your schedule, I mean, was it kind of you were, you know, an office-based kind of 9 to 5 kind of thing, or was it some nights you were there till like 2 in the morning, and was it kind of just when inspiration took you? How did that kind of work?
It was, yeah. It wasn't a 9 to 5 thing. It was probably more of a 12 till 3 a.m. thing. And you would work, there's no way I could have been in a relationship back then. And I've seen a lot of people's relationship buckle because of, the crunch at the time. It was expected. It was the norm. There's sometimes I'd want to leave early at 1 a.m. and I'd try and sly out because I felt guilty if anyone saw us. That was the mindset of how it was at the time, And I mean, towards the end of the project, I would just sleep at work. I would just sleep in the office. So I would finish doing what I did, 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning, and I would just snooze there, feet on the desk until like 10 the next day, and then crack on. I think I even had a camp bed in my studio at one point.
I was wondering what were the changes that happened then with the soundtrack and stuff when The Last Revelation came out.
All right, okay, yeah. I mean, The Last Revelation was my first stint at doing some music for Tomb Raider. Although, when Tomb Raider 3 was approaching completion, I did write a piece of music. I remember playing it because, like I said earlier, I wanted to kind of feel the game. I wanted to understand where it was coming from. And when it was still in development, I was getting edits of 3, and I remember getting to the final boss and realizing that was no music there, and it just felt like there was, for a final boss, it was just minimal. So I created some music for that. So the first piece of music for Tomb Raider I did write was for Tomb Raider 3, but unfortunately, it was just far too late to get that into the build and go through all the QA checks with Sony, etc., etc. So I kept that piece of music for Tomb Raider 4. I redid it, spruced it up a bit and redid it for Tomb Raider 4. But yeah, I mean, I wanted to carry on the nostalgia that Nathan recreated, but I also wanted to put my own identity into it. And Nathan used a JV1080. I had a JV1080. It just seemed the natural progression. I mean, I think I just did it my way, but with Nathan's motif in mind. I think any composer will, unless you're specifically told not to, will put their stamp on it at some point. I can't remember specifically, but I think, especially with the Last Revelation theme tune, I don't think I originally had the Tomb Raider motif in there. And I'm not sure whether I thought this or somebody else told me, but I remember having to kind of pour it in at the last minute. So yeah, I don't think that the change was huge. I just think it was done slightly differently. And again, I can't speak for Nathan here, but I always had it in my mind that the music would possibly be performed by a real orchestra. But like I said, that didn't happen until Angel of Darkness. So,
And I was thinking, like, woodwind instruments are so kind of prominent in these soundtracks.
Yes.
Why do you think that really screamed Lara Croft?
That's probably a better question for Nathan, but I mean, I can see his perspective on that. It's very feminine. Woodwind's quite feminine. I mean, and it just suits the mood of an English heroine like Lara. It just works for me. I can. She is Woodwind.
I totally associate it with Lara every time I hear woodwind instruments. Even
I don't know whether it was
things.
Well, that's it. I don't know if it was something that before that was referenced towards people similar to Lara, where now that's just took some sort of hold on the psyche of people now. That's the association with females.
Obviously, with the Egyptian theme, I mean, were you taking much influence from stuff like Indiana Jones and The Mummy or Stargate, anything like that?
Definitely The Mummy, yeah. I had the soundtrack to The Mummy. I used to listen to quite a bit.
Nice.
I think Tomb Raider's always been the female Indiana Jones. I've always had that in my mind, whether that's the potential of the original creators. But I think on Tomb Raider 4, there's a bit in it that I call the Indiana Jones moment. I think it's on the intro cutscene when she's falling down a pit. There's a very Indiana Jones bit, and I remember doing that tongue-in-cheek thing, it just had to be done.
And there's that kind of a core Rick Dangerous connection as well, isn't there?
Yeah, there is, yeah. Oh, what a game that was. That was long before my time there, but I did love the core games back in the day. So just to be a core, and with that history and heritage, it was fantastic, without the Tomb Raider brand as well.
I was wondering about Tomb Raider Chronicles. I heard the team weren't massive fans of it, but no. Yeah, how did you kind of approach that project, and what was the team's reaction to it?
I mean, to be honest, for me, I was still fairly new to the brand, so I was keen to do it. Tomb Raider 4 was such a huge job for one sound guy. I mean, obviously Martin did help out towards the end, which was needed, and he did a cracking job kind of like, digging us out of holes. But when I look back at it now, retrospectively, it was probably a 4 or 5 man job, really, which, might have obviously reduced crunch, and it's just the fact that we had to have it out for a certain time. But when I got into 5, it was really cool because it was a lot smaller than what The Last Revelation was, and there was no new. I mean, one of the deals that the programmers made with management to say, look, if we do this, we don't do that. It was that they don't add new features, they don't add vehicles. There was a couple of kind of things that they wanted to kind of like seal the deal. But for me, it was great because it was probably the first. It was the first and only Tomb Raider where I've done it all without the help of anyone else, because I'd already learned what I'd learned from The Last Revelation, and it was a smaller project, so it was easier to be able to do what you wanted to do. You didn't have to go around as many levels and populate it with sounds, or you didn't have to kind of there weren't as many cutscenes and FMVs, etc., etc. So it was for me, from my point of view, even though the rest of the team just didn't want to do it. I'm not speaking for them, but that's the kind of impression I got. But for me, it was I was ready to tackle it full on. So,
and I guess it must have had a different kind of a different vibe as well, because it had like those, I'd say, like matrixy, futuristic kind of Metal Gear Solid style sections.
Didn't it? Yeah.
How did you approach that sound wise?
I'd started using a lot more synths. I think with The Last Revelation, it was pretty much other than the final one of the boss tunes. I think it was pretty much all kind of strings, French horns, piccolos, that kind of thing. But with that, I kind of took more of a synthy approach. If you listen to the end credits, I drew in for it. I can't remember the game, but there was a game in the 80s by Atari that had that kind of feel to it, and I drew inspiration from that. And I did incorporate a lot of synth sounds, and then I did put some orchestral stuff in there as well, so it was a bit of a hybrid. I just basically worked with what I saw. If it would look a bit high tech, I thought, well, high tech's not going to just be orchestral. There's going to be kind of synth stuff in there as well. Maybe some drums, that kind of electronic drums going on in there as well, and that's pretty much how I tackled that area.
Well, by the time we got into, I think it would have been Tomb Raider 6, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Angel of Darkness. And obviously then, I mean, it wasn't just a PlayStation exclusive. Also, there was a Dreamcast port of that game too.
Yes.
Do you think that kind of opened it up to new fans then? And what was it like kind of working on the Dreamcast as well?
Again, it wasn't something I worked directly with. It was just assets handed over to somebody who ported the game over. I think with Tomb Raider 4 and 5, it was converted to Dreamcast as well.
And it's kind of returning to its roots as well, because originally it was on the Sega console that it came out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then basically Sony said we want an exclusive rights deal with co-design for Tomb Raider. I think that was why it was pretty much primarily for at least a couple of the episodes anyway for PlayStation, and then we were allowed to do a PC version 6 months later or something, or maybe it was a couple of months later. That was the kind of deal. But the Dreamcast, the one thing I remember about the Dreamcast version is there was, the technology was a little bit better. But to be honest, I never got involved in any of that. Just handed the assets over. But we did. Can't remember who initiated this, but Paula Oakenfold did a remix of the Tomb Raider 4 theme that I wrote, which I thought was Paula Oakenfold, great, take a notch on the belt.
Yeah.
But that was pretty much the only kind of difference I kind of recall with the Dreamcast versions. But with the Angel of Darkness, it was like, okay, this is going to be a launch title with PS2. PS2 is a brand new piece of technology. It's everyone's buzzing about it. The graphics are going to be so much superior. We're going to have to rewrite the engine, the level editors, this, that, and the other. And, the natural progression from that was to bring better sound. I mean, the chip on the PlayStation 2 wasn't what they planned it to be. At the last minute, because they couldn't get it to where they wanted it to be, which I think it ended up being on the PS3, is they just stuck 2 PlayStation 1 chips in, so you got double the memory, basically. But because it was a new platform, and everything else was new, we wanted the music to be new. And I think I remember sitting there, that was me and Martin, actually, because me and Martin both got involved with this project. And we both sat and says, okay, we've got word this, want a real orchestra involved with this, or at least we're going to present our case for to have a real orchestra. And I think we'd come up with a list. At the top of the list was like the LSO at Abbey Road Studios. The bottom of the list was like Peter Lee, a junior orchestra at Peter Lee Shotton Hall. So we kind of went through from what we'd love to something that if we had to make do with it, we'll do with it. But when we went to see Jeremy Heath Smith, he basically just said, "Yep, let's just do the LSO at Abbey Road." We were like, "Whoa, okay." And then that's where the whole transformation happened from, using samplers, synths, S&S modules to, writing for a full symphony orchestra. It was really cool. It was a really exciting time in my life. Probably more exciting than getting the gig at Core. First time I had to use a real orchestra. So
I would say so. That's London Symphonic Orchestra or Symphony, isn't it?
London Symphony, yeah.
Yeah, and that's at Abbey Road Studios as well. Yeah,
About,
legendary Beatles ones. I saw a photo of you guys on the crossing with Tomb Raider shooting across as well. What was it like to work there? It must have just been insane.
It was. I mean, for me, it was. I can't remember much of the day because I was buzzing. I was on such a high, not just with excitement. I was just trying to make sure everything was kind of, dare I say, orchestrated well. I remember we had a librarian that was ready to kind of print all the music off, etc., etc. But we had done all that the day before, so we were going around on all the chairs, putting the music in order, this, that, and the other. So we had a lot to do, this, that, and the other, and we were that hyped. I remember very little of it. One thing I do remember though was they performed the theme tune, and I think it was the third take where they got it right. The first two takes, I mean, obviously, in hindsight and with today's technology, we could have repaired the error. Basically, the first two takes, the harp at the end, the last note was out of tune. So they made these, they played it perfectly, and then this harp thing was out of tune. Obviously, not these days you could just, auto-tune it or stick it in, a DAW and fix it. But we decided, let's do another take, and they did another take. And I remember at that point, I went from the control room into the live room, which was the studio one. I just stood next to the conductor, and to hear it in all its glory, in that capacity, was just like, whoa, this is something that doesn't happen every day, and it hasn't happened since.
Must have given you goosebumps, did it, when you first heard it?
It was unreal. If anyone says you highlight your career, it was standing in that room listening to that theme tune being played, and they played it beautifully. Considering they'd never seen the music before, they came in, picked the music up and just done it. It's like, that's just unheard of, it's out of this world for me. So
and you were pretty much going from like Cubase to a full live orchestra, so that must have taken some translating and effort.
It did, yeah. We did everything in Cubase, as you would normally, without all the bells and whistles in production. So you would do your piece in Cubase, you would arrange it in that, you give it to an orchestrator, he would turn it into notes and dots, and we would get kind of demos of what the orchestrator did using I can't remember, it wasn't Notator, I can't remember what they were using at the time. Notator's a completely different thing, but they used some sort of score editor, and we would get like kind of MIDI demo versions of what they did. So we might have like a string playing a sustain. They might get the second violin playing some sort of arpeggio on top of that. So they didn't just like for like it. They turned it into something that was exciting. That added extra harmonics or extra layers or extra tones to kind of bring it alive a bit more. So going from Cubase to that, it's quite a jump. Doing something on the JV1080 and then hearing it by an 83-piece live orchestra, it's the dynamic's huge.
Well, obviously, outside of Tomb Raider, you worked on other titles as well.
Yeah.
Including Driver San Francisco too.
Love that project.
So what's kind of your memories of working on that franchise, and did you talk much to Alistair Brimble, who did the original soundtrack?
No, I didn't. I mean, I'm connected with Alistair Brimble, but don't talk much. But I was purely sound designer on that project. I wasn't involved with music in any way. It was towards the end of the project, Ubisoft Reflections in Newcastle were looking for an extra hand, and I can't remember who told me about it, but somebody says, at the time I wasn't doing anything, so I kind of applied, and I went in as a contractor, but I was working in-house, so most people just assumed I was an employee of Ubisoft. So it was just great. I mean, we had a huge team. There was about, when I say like with the original Tomb Raiders, it was just me and or Martin. it was probably a 4 to 5 man gig on Driver San Francisco. I think at the height of it, we had about 15 on the audio team. So it was, somebody was doing that ambience, somebody was doing the car sound, someone was doing all the auxiliary sounds, the collisions. There was somebody programmed. We had 3 audio programmers. It was just great to be part of a team, all with the same kind of goal in mind. Sometimes when you're sitting there on your own, you hit a brick wall, like you say. Sometimes you just you don't lose inspiration, but you lose your direction. And sometimes you just need somebody to say, look, are you heading in the right direction? That just puts you back on track. And being in a team of sound designers on Driver San Francisco was absolutely fantastic, because everyone got on really well. It was probably one of my most enjoyable projects that I've worked on. I didn't have anything to do with the music. I did hear some of the music being produced as and when it was done, and I loved what was done. And I also loved the choice of licensed music as well. There's a lot of licensed music on that, and I think the audio director that kind of got involved with all that did a great job, because I think the overall sound of Driver San Francisco sounds great. It's probably one of the only games that I've worked on that I can play without feeling uncomfortable.
Right.
It's an awesome title, yeah. I love the whole Driver series. It was just so stylish, wasn't it?
And it felt to me as well, 'cause when that game came out, obviously Driver 3, was a bit controversial, the way it was released, and all the controversy that went around about that game. But it felt like San Francisco was a real return to form for that franchise, I think.
It was. I mean, I don't think it was received as well as it should have. It's a great, if you play it, I'm sure you guys have played it. I played it with my son. I haven't for a while, but we did. And we both really enjoyed it. And I just thought, this game is so underrated. I love the storyline. I love the feel of the vehicles, the physics, the handling. It's just really well crafted piece of work. It took longer than anticipated. It cost a lot more than they ever budgeted for. But at the end of the day, I think it redeemed the franchise. But then again, we've not had another driver since, have we? Although, no, I best not say this. Go on then, why not? Watch Dogs was originally, it was originally Driver 6.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I'd heard that before. That I thought it was like a rumor, but it was meant to be part of the Driver 6, series.
Yeah.
Then
I remember when we worked on Driver San Francisco, Driver 5, whatever. The audio director from Montreal came over, who was the audio director for Watch Dogs. He came over to kind of like work out, where we were going with it, etc., etc. It almost felt like he was there spying on us, but he wasn't. He was a lovely lad, Olivier, I think he's fantastic. He's really good at his job, and he's very articulate, and he knows what he wants, and he knows where he's going. So, but yeah, I think that was the original intention. It was going to be Driver 6, but I mean, it wasn't even Watch Dogs when I first started working on it. It was another working title. Can't really remember what it was, but if you went onto the server and you got the original builds and all, the hierarchy of the project, the root folder was called Driver 6.
Right, interesting.
That's mad.
Because I love Watch Dogs as well. But yeah, I mean, it kind of feels like, it's long overdue getting a new Driver game. I think it's over a decade since we last had it.
Is, yeah.
I feel like it would be good to have that franchise back again someday, wouldn't it?
It would. Martin Edmondson being involved in it as well. It was just like it was needed, Like I said, it took a long time to do and it cost a lot to do, but I think the end result was really worthwhile, at least redeeming it for a future release.
Well, Peter, it's been amazing reminiscing with you about these incredible games that you've worked on. I mean, what are you working on these days then? Anything you can tell us about?
I can't. I am working for Tag Games at the moment. We are working on a new IP, and it's going to be huge. I mean, I'm still kind of like looking at the scope of the project and how big it's going to be, and it's going to be absolutely huge. And I think from a sound point of view as well, I don't think there's going to be any corners cut. I think I think I've got my work cut out to make this sound as big as they want it to sound and as big as I want it to sound. So just watch this space. I'm not really we're still unsure an exact timeline because we're in a pre-production phase, but I think it's going to be spectacular. So, and I'm going to be very busy.
Plenty more late nights ahead then.
Probably.
And also, just quickly, our listeners should check out the Dark Angel Symphony as well, which was a remake of your epic tunes. That's pretty
much,
awesome. Yeah, great reaction on Kickstarter.
Yeah, it was phenomenal. I mean, there was a bit of push and pull to get it done, but I think considering what we had to be able to do it, I think we did all right. You know, I mean, I normally look back at my old projects and don't want to know about them, but that's just natural for people in the music industry who's worked on something for quite a long time. You live and breathe it so much that you don't want to kind of live and breathe it anymore. But I actually look back at that and I just think, you know, I achieved quite a lot, and I learned quite a lot as well. It was my first orchestral recording since Angel of Darkness. And I worked with some absolutely awesome people on that as well. You know, some people I've wanted to work with for quite a long time. So it opened doors in that respect. Yeah, I enjoyed that project very much.
Well, Peter, thank you so much for being our guest this week and coming on and sharing some of your memories. It's been fascinating talking to you.
You guys, sorry if I waffle on too much and I spoke too broad Geordie. When I get passionate, I tend to talk a lot of Geordie, so you might need to de-Geordify that or something.
We'll put some subtitles in.
Exactly, that'll sort.
Cheers, Peter.
All right, thanks guys.